Initiative Community Learning Series. We're so glad to have you here today. I'm Kim Biasioli. I'm the Natural Resources Manager for the county. And if you missed the first two webinars in our series, the introduction to the rural area and the second one about our water supply, you can find those recordings on our public input site, which is here. And we're going to continue this learning series every Friday at noon through April 9th. So we hope you'll come back and join us for some of the other topics that we have lined up. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the Stream Health Initiative, the goal of this project is to develop strategies for improving stream health in the county. And we're doing this really in collaboration with all of you as members of the community and with the technical expertise of professionals from other organizations as well. So today we are going to hear from some of our county staff about water protection policies and programs. And I will get to introducing our speakers in a moment here. Frank, can you advance just to the next slide? Thank you. So before we start, I just want to give a few quick tips about Zoom. So today is going to be primarily presentation based, but we will have some time reserved at the end for questions. For those of you joining by computer, tablet, or smartphone, you'll see the Q&A icon in the webinar toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And during the presentation, you can enter questions into that Q&A module, and we'll either answer them in real time or reserve them for the Q&A at the end. If you have a question and you've called in by phone, please reserve your questions till the end, and you can raise your virtual hand by pushing *9. So when it's time for questions, we'll unmute you, and then you'll be able to verbally ask your question. Yeah. Participants cannot use the chat function, but you might see us sending messages out to the whole group. And just for your awareness, this presentation is being recorded, and it will be available online on our public input site next week. Okay, so you can advance, Frank, I will introduce our speakers for today. We have Greg Harper, who's the Chief of Environmental Services for Albemarle County, and Frank Pohl, who is our county engineer. And again, they're going to talk to us about water protection policies and programs. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. This is Greg Harper, everybody. I was trying to show myself, but I don't think it's possible for me to do so, and that's perfectly fine because I'm not looking all that great today anyway. And I'm going to kick us off, I guess. And now I can't see which slide we're on. So, okay, here we go.
Because I hit the stop share button by accident. Sorry about that.
All right. Well, Frank, why don't you go ahead and jump to the next slide? By the way, I'm the Chief of Environmental Services at the county. I've been with the county for like 15 plus years. And between Frank and I, our two divisions / departments implement quite a few programs that protect water resources. And I first wanted to kind of take a step back and a step back in time as well to give you a little bit more context about kind of where the county fits in within like federal and state regulations as well. So I'm sure everybody's heard of the Clean Water Act. It was implemented in 1972. It's a federal water protection program, of course. And with the Clean Water Act, there were really two approaches to protecting waters. One was called the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, as you could see on the screen, and the other was called the Total Maximum Daily Loads. And they were quite different in how they protect waters or the path which is taken to protect waters. Frank, why don't you click the next thing, add a little bit more context. So the MPDES program, as it's called, essentially dictated effluent standards for water, wastewater, stormwater, industrial waters coming out of pipes, basically. So there were limits about how much of many types of pollutants could be coming out of these pipes in this water. And TMDL really didn't care so much about what was coming out of pipes, but what really was the water quality in the streams, in the bays, in the lakes, and so forth. Next, click, Frank. So again, into pipe versus receiving waters. What was the actual health and quality of the receiving waters? One more time, Frank. And so the MPDES logically dealt with point sources like factories, wastewater treatment plants, and the TMDL program dealt not only with point sources, but non-point sources as well. Non-point sources typically is thought of as stormwater runoff because it comes from everywhere. Okay, so next slide, Frank. And so I'm telling you this because these federal programs really to this day drives what happens at the state and local levels as well. So the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System is actually implemented at the state level as the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. Clever name, I know. And it really drives or kind of manifests itself as the Virginia Stormwater Management Program, or VSMP. And Frank is going to talk a lot about that program today. But it also created this like permit called the MS4 permit, which is issued to industries, governments, and so forth. MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. So it's a program to regulate discharges coming out of these storm sewer systems, which picks up runoff from large areas of land, but ultimately discharges it into water bodies through a pipe. So it's kind of a quasi point source. And so the MPDES program kind of like drove both of those programs, which the county is acting under. The county has a permit, MS4 permit. But the TMDL program was something that was actually ignored by the federal government for many decades until they were sued by some environmental groups back in maybe the 80s. Some of you might know better than me. So it was kind of reawakened more recently. And out of that program, you have the Chesapeake Bay Cleanup Plan. You probably heard of that. That's really a TMDL type of thing. And so TMDL is implemented as part of our permit here at the local level. So I hope that made some sense. Maybe it might make sense more sense later as Frank and I talk about how we implement these two major programs at the local level. I also wanted to give you guys a sense of kind of like the history in Albemarle County of protecting water. Goes back a long time, way back in the 70s, just a few years after the Clean Water Act was implemented. And I say we, Albemarle County, I wasn't here, of course, but the county implemented a soil erosion and sedimentation ordinance way back in 1975, kind of as part of a national rollout of erosion and sediment control programs. But there wasn't really a requirement on local governments to implement stormwater management programs or runoff control programs really until fairly recently. And still, many programs implemented at the local level are voluntarily enacted locally. And if the local programs don't step up, like local governments don't step up to implement them, they would be implemented by the state. So I just wanted you guys to see this to understand like all the things that the county has done historically to protect our water supply, to protect water quality in our streams, sometimes through ordinance, but also through land use planning as well. You could see in 1980, the growth area land use plan amendments were adopted. And so, you know, the growth areas you might notice aren't located in water supply protection areas, except for the town of Crozet. And so that was deliberate. And so the lands located outside the growth areas were also zoned many years ago. And that those actions have a huge impact on water quality throughout the county because it concentrates growth in the urban areas and it prevents sprawl, for instance. Okay, so that was just a little bit of a background on kind of like where, you know, some of our existing current programs come from. And now I'm going to turn it over to Frank for him to dig more deeply into the VSMP program and how it's implemented locally.
Thank you, Greg. So as Greg mentioned, we've kind of developed our latest regs based on the state VSMP program. They have two programs actually, the VESCP, which is Erosion and Sediment Control Program, and the Stormwater Management Program. And those were passed and enacted in October of 2013. And those two regulations include, of course, sediment control, controlling erosion from regulated land disturbing activities, minimum standards for erosion and sediment control measures, maintenance, inspections, reporting, and enforcement requirements. And then on the VSMP side of the regulations, there's stormwater management for the regulated activities also, pollution prevention plans, stormwater management plans, which addresses quality and quantity requirements, pollution prevention plans, which is a little bit different than the stormwater prevention plans in that it's more focused on like solvents and materials used during construction, not so much as the runoff from the land. And then there's also regarding, there's also maintenance, inspections, reporting, and enforcement requirements for stormwater management also. So in 2014, July 1, we adopted Chapter 17, the Albemarle County Code, the Water Protection Ordinance. It was we already had an ordinance, but this was, how should I say, developed based on the new state regulations. And the purposes are to protect public health, safety, and welfare, protect state waters, protect property and natural resources, reduce pollution and illicit discharges, sustainability of groundwater sources, and to implement state laws. So there was a big push or a big change in our ordinance at that time, July 1, 2014. And before I dig into the actual regulations, I wanted to give you an overview of our current program and who is in the program. So we have an engineering staff that enforces the water protection ordinance, and it's in community development for the front end side of development. I'll put it that way, that we regulate all active construction projects, land disturbing projects that are considered shoot, I'm drawing a blank. Let's put it this way, that are regulated is what I wanted to say. So we have 6 engineering inspectors, 3.5 FTEs of those inspectors are for WPO projects, which are the subdivisions and site plans. 1.5 of our inspectors are for single family. The SF stands for single family inspectors. And 1 basically addresses complaints and assists the other inspectors for other issues on their projects. We have 4 engineering reviewers reviewing plans that come in. They don't only review WPO plans, but they also review site plans, subdivision plats, any other types of documents that come through CDD. We have an administrator, and then we have myself as the county engineer. Our current activity as of this morning, we're 174 active WPO permits, which means these are actual land disturbing projects on the ground that require WPO permits. There are 251 active single family permits. These do not include townhouses. The townhouses are included in the 174 because they are not exempt from getting a WPO permit. So these are the AIL are what we call agreements in lieu of a plan. And those apply to the single family homes that meet certain criteria. There are 21 plans in review, WPO only. So I'm not reporting to you today the other reviews that we're doing. And there were 101 complaints last year in 2020, just to give you a kind of an idea of what we have in the pipeline and who's there to do that work. So what does the water protection ordinance regulate? Well, of course it regulates Albemarle County, right? Land disturbances within the county, but also in the town of Scottsville. And the town extends over into the adjacent county. So we also, in the Fluvanna County. And so we also regulate those activities in that side of the county line. And I put here CDD because that's Community Development Department. There's a distinction you'll see here in a minute that I'll point out. We also, excuse me, the Water Protection Ordinance also regulates erosion impact areas, which is through CDD, and stream buffers through CDD. A couple of other things that the WPO regulates that are not managed in CDD are the permanent stormwater management facilities and illicit discharges, connections, and dumping. That's through our Facilities and Environmental Services Department, which is Greg's group. So whenever there's a project that's finished and turns over to an HOA, for instance, the stormwater management facilities from then on become operational with the homeowners, and Greg's group is involved with inspecting those and ensuring compliance moving forward. So a brief description or definition of land disturbance. It's from the VESCP perspective, it's a little bit pretty much the same, but there's a little bit of distinction between the definitions because of the exclusions mainly. But it's clearing, grading, excavating, transporting, and filling of land. In this, the VESCP is mainly focused on, of course, soil erosion or the carrying of sediments into streams. And then for the VSMP, it's mainly focused on the changes in runoff characteristics from the different types of land uses that can result from these activities, clearing, grading, or excavation. So the VESCP regulated activity, I wanted to share with you the different regulations because there are some minor distinctions. The county has adopted a land disturbance area of 10,000 square feet to regulate erosion and sediment control, or land disturbing activities for erosion and sediment control. And we've done this for both VESCP and VESMP. So we could have really lumped these together, but there are a few minor distinctions I wanted to point out. One is the erosion impact area. That's really focused on erosion and sediment control and agricultural roads that are built within a common plan of development that are converted to the common plan within a 2-year window. You can build an agricultural road today without being regulated, but if you bring in a plan within 2 years of the construction of that road that's part of a common plan, then it would be regulated. And a common plan is for instance, Old Trail is a common plan of development. It was by a developer who rezoned a large tract of land, and then they have different parts of the project happening at different times. And it can be different operators also. It doesn't have to be the same operator. And then on the right are your exempt activities. I won't read them for you. You can see those. And as I mentioned, the VSMP also has the threshold of 10,000 square feet and also the common plan of development. And that's just a stormwater detention facility in the picture there, underground detention. So you can see here exempt activities are similar. There's agricultural, horticultural, forestal activities. Those are exempt under both mining, oil, and gas operations. Less than 10,000 square feet, unless you're part of a common plan of development. Single family residences are exempt if you're not part of a common plan of development here. Up to an acre is kind of the threshold. Then we require an agreement in lieu of for stormwater management. And then a couple other things there that you see. I'll get to that question here, Kirk, when I get to the end when we get to the end. VESCP requirements and VSMP requirements. So this is just digging into a little bit of what that means, right? So when you're on the ground and you come in and you propose something, you submit a plan, and then you have to meet certain standards. And this is the VESCH, is the Virginia Erosion Sediment Control Handbook. It's a handbook, I think, from '91. and it hasn't changed much since then. But it includes standards for standards and specifications for silt fence installation, sediment traps or sediment basin installations, construction entrances, inlet and outlet protection on pipes, diversions, check dams. There should be an et cetera under this, because there are more types of standards and specifications. There's also the MS 19, which is the minimum standards 19 that we have to look at for how these projects affect offsite properties and things like that. So that's really the focus of the sediment erosion and sediment control measures. And then through the VSMP, we're focused more on the stormwater side of things. And it's really broken down into two different categories. One is water quantity, like the volume and the rate of runoff, and the water quality, which is nutrient loading or loading of, coming from those projects. And from the water quantity perspective at the top there, we have channel protection and flood protection. And there's different ways to handle it depending on where you discharge your water. If it's to a man-made system, there's a little bit different than if you go to a natural stream, for instance. A natural stream has a highest standard, and they've developed in the 2014 regulations what's called the energy balance, which means you have to bring it basically, the 1-year storm event cannot discharge in the post-development condition more than it's an energy balance that provides a reduced pre-development rate depending on the size of the project. So and then there's flood protection, and people provide detention to provide flood protection. They actually do it for both channel protection and flood protection. And when you enter into a floodplain, flood protection, essentially based on the current regs, stops. The flood protection is based on a 10-year storm event, and channel protection is based on a 2 or 1-year event. So water quality is typically performed on site through certain BMPs. That's a best management practice. And DEQ has a website with, I forget the
BMP Clearinghouse?
Yeah, the Clearinghouse. Thank you, Laurel. Where they have a list of all of the different BMPs, which includes biofilters, extended detention, infiltration practices, etc. So there's standards for all of those, and that you can use one of them or a mix of them, combination. We prefer on-site BMPs, but there's other issues with that with regards to long-term maintenance, of course, costs, easements, and things like that. So then there's another option which the state allows, which we also allow because we've pretty much adopted the state standards, which is an offsite option through nutrient credits. And those are offsite nutrient credits. We do have a bank in the county. I think we only have one. I don't know of a second one. Otherwise, they're all downstream from us. So the downside to this is that most of our water quality is not being provided locally. The goal from Ches Bay perspective is that it's still helping the bay, but that's not necessarily a local option that's helping us. So, but those are two different options. There are criteria you have to meet to use the offsite option though also. So we also have stream buffers in the county. This is not required. It is a voluntary provision that we've adopted, or regulation that we've adopted here locally, but it does only apply when, here's the when. It applies when each erosion and sediment control plan and each VSMP permit is needed. So whenever we have a VSMP plan or ENS plan, building permit plan, any type of plan that requires like a land disturbance permit, then we check for stream buffers. We have all of our stream buffers on GIS. Those are so that we can confirm whether or not there is one during a development type of activity. Where are these buffers? There's two different criteria here that we look at. Within a development area, there's a 100-foot stream buffer on, I said intermittent streams, that's wrong. So within development areas, it's on perennial streams. I apologize. There's not a buffer on intermittent streams in the development area, just on perennial streams and contiguous non-tidal wetlands. Within the rural supply protection area, water supply protection area, those are waters that drain to our reservoirs, drinking water reservoirs, or other rural land. So in the rural areas, there's a 100-foot stream buffer on intermittent and perennial streams, contiguous non-tidal wetlands, or the limits of a floodplain, whichever is greater. In addition to that, on the actual water supply impoundment, there is a 200-foot buffer from the floodplain of that impoundment. There are exemptions from stream buffers, which include these activities. Typically, it's like a sanitary sewer line that needs to get to a development or a road transportation project. Those are VDOT type transportation projects, or roads that will become public, that are being built by a developer, for instance. Silviculture activities, if they follow certain regulations for BMPs. Public airport improvements are also exempt. And these are separate from the other ones because these are just straight out exempt. There's no requirement for any type of mitigation. There is a requirement for minimization though. So we do look at alternate routes, for instance, to minimize impacts. Authorized improvements, these are things that are mostly pre-existing except for number 2 there, which is temporary E&S measures, which we proposed to change in our phase 1A proposals to the board that are going in April 21st, next month. So pre-existing buildings, we do allow some impacts because of pre-existing structures. These are existing structures prior to the ordinance, so it kind of grandfathers them in. And then water dependent facilities and miscellaneous uses like docks and things like that. And then on the right here, we have impacts that are allowed with mitigation. So mitigation involves replanting, finding a place on the property where you can replant or restore buffers that are not wooded, and protect those areas. So there's, landward 50 feet for reasonable use. We've been trying to define that and get a better handle on reasonable use lately. Reasonable use does not mean an extra lot, for instance, but it could be. Is everybody seeing my screen okay? Because it just kind of. Hello, can somebody respond?
It's there, but it's really white.
Yeah, it just turned white on me too. Okay. I'll keep going. Stream crossings. These are mainly for like driveways, streets, and mainly for driveways and roads and streets. And then water sewer facilities, as we talked about, and then sole building sites on pre-existing lots. And when you have a sole building sites, we had one recently, was in downtown Crozet, old downtown area, and the whole site was within the buffer. So in order to prevent a taking, we still have to allow those to be used for at least a single, for what they're zoned, with some mitigation if they can provide it. Mitigation can also include removal of invasives. So it's not just planting if you can't find a place to plant on your property. So we do have a couple of voluntary higher standards, and one is the lower threshold for disturbance. And there's been a lot of discussion, should we go lower? But we are at 10,000 and the state is an acre. We don't report any land disturbances under an acre to to DEQ unless it is within a common plan of development. And then stream buffers, we do have stream buffers. They're not required in this area, but we have adopted that standard or that regulation for Albemarle County. So that's it for the WPO related to land disturbances. We do also do groundwater assessments. We thought this was something we wanted to bring up because groundwater obviously feeds some streams, and groundwater is a valuable resource in this area. And we do require groundwater assessments for these types of developments. You can see here we have 4 different levels of assessments that are required. The single family is the lowest level, which requires, for instance, a drilling completion report for each well drilled and the location of the wells. These are really something that are shared with VDH, Virginia Department of Health, and they get involved and they permit these wells and sewer systems, but this is for wells right here. We don't actually permit those, so it's through VDH. But when you get up into the tier 2 and tier 3 ones, you're talking more about commercial type developments, non-residential uses or subdivisions. And so we will review those with VDH when those are submitted to us. And with that, I will turn it over back to Greg.
Okay, and
to
I'm
wrap
probably
us
going
up.
to talk for another 10 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end to answer a lot of these questions that are poured in. Thanks so much for the questions. So now we're gonna shift away from how the county regulates land disturbing activities and other things related to how the county keeps compliant with regulations on the county from the state and federal governments. And I already mentioned that the main way we're regulated at the state level is through this permit called an MS4 permit. And I've included a little image here just showing you the storm sewer system that we've mapped. The lines are in yellow on this image that basically collect runoff from all areas of the county. This is obviously the urban area just north of Charlottesville. And you have polluted runoff basically coming out of the ends of the pipes, discharging into what are state waters. And so this permit that is issued to the county is really a permit allowing us to discharge pollutants into these streams from our county areas. So it's a little odd to think that the county is polluting, but I guess we do so just because the land of the county carrying pollutants will eventually reach streams. And so the MS4 permits are issued to localities that have areas that they own or operate that lie within a US Census designated urban area. And so the Charlottesville area is obviously a designated urban area. So not only the county, but the city and UVA also have MS4 permits and requirements under those permits to minimize pollutant discharges. And so the 2 big parts of the MS4 permit are what's called 6 minimum control measures. And those actually came into effect. This MS4 permit was first issued to the county and other partners locally way back in 2003. In 2014, these TMDL requirements became part of the permit as well. Next slide, Frank. So I'll go through quickly the 6 minimum control measures because they sort of dictate 6 different types of things that we do to basically reduce the amount of pollution that comes out of those pipes into streams. The first 2 are kind of related. Public education and outreach is the first one, and public involvement and participation, which is a little bit different, is the second one. And as I said, the city and UVA also have permits and also have the requirement to do public education and outreach involvement and participation. So we, since 2004 probably, have worked together under this partnership called the Rivanna Stormwater Education Partnership. There's a great resource website that you can go to find all sorts of stuff about the local water quality and some of the programs we do and educational materials and so forth. So I would encourage people to check out that website, Rivanna-stormwater.org, and you can see at the bottom all the partners that are involved. Even partners like the Service Authority and Rivanna authorities are partners to this, even though they're not actually issued an MS4 permit. Next slide. So we are also responsible for finding and eliminating what's called illicit discharges. These are basically discharges of pollutants that should not be in stormwater. Obviously, stormwater is going to pick up pollutants off of parking lots and lawns and things like that. And that's tolerated, I guess. What's not tolerated are deliberate discharges or accidental discharges that are sort of like out of the ordinary of normal stormwater. You could see the picture on the left is a guy peering suspiciously at an inlet that somebody has clearly dumped something on it. So if we are notified or we stumble upon something like this, we'll work with our fire rescue folks sometimes if we need somebody with a badge to help us enforce things, or if it gets to the point that we need to force somebody to take serious action to do some cleanup, we'll work with fire rescue. We also work with our partners at the state to kind of seek out and find out what's going on and to try to stop things like this from happening. Next slide. Okay, this is basically our permit requires us to do the very thing that Frank has already talked about, and that is to manage erosion and stormwater runoff from construction sites. Next slide, Frank. And our permit also requires us to manage stormwater post-construction. Frank already mentioned that his crew kind of reviews plans and improves designs and approves the construction of these facilities. Well, once something becomes kind of like permanent and is just like operated day to day, my crew is responsible for ensuring that the 1,100 or so stormwater facilities that exist in the county are operated correctly. And so that requires us to reach out to homeowners association or property owners or whatever, just to say, hey, we're here to inspect your facility, make sure it's working correctly, and we'll work with them to do whatever's necessary to keep those functioning correctly. Next slide. And so the last minimum control measure is just simple pollution prevention and good housekeeping on county properties, whether it's our buildings or parks or what have you. Schools too. Public schools is obviously under our MS4 permit as well. So we just need to do the right things in handling materials so that we're not contributing pollution unnecessarily into the storm sewer system. Okay, so that was the 6 minimum control measures. As I said, in 2014, I believe it was, these additional requirements came out related to total maximum daily loads. And I guess I haven't really explained what those are yet, but it's basically, a total maximum daily load is the maximum amount of a particular pollutant that a water body can handle before it becomes impaired. It's a horrible acronym. People trip up on it all the time unless you're really in the business. But what it kind of translates into is a recognition that a water body is not healthy, and it's a plan to reduce the pollutants discharging into that water body enough so that the water body can sustain its designated uses like swimming, fishing, water supply, wildlife support, etc. And so we're actually within the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay, of course, and we have local streams that are impaired too. So between the Chesapeake Bay being impaired and some local streams being impaired, we have a duty basically to do things that will not just keep things the same, but to make things better by reducing the amount of pollution that is discharged into these water bodies. And I'll describe how in the next few slides. So some of the most effective ways, cost-effective ways to do that are, can you click one more time, Frank? I feel like some text is missing. There we go, stream restoration projects. So stream restoration projects are kind of like new. They've been around for probably 20 so years or so, but basically it's a capital project to address the incision of streams. And if you were listening a couple of weeks ago to Scott Clark talk about kind of like the legacy of impacts to our watersheds and our stream channels, we have a lot of streams that are, not very stable. So you could see the picture on the left shows some pretty steep banks that have no vegetation on them. They're clearly unstable. Every time you get a big rain, more of that sediment is washed into the stream itself, carried downstream. With that, you have nitrogen and phosphorus attached to it, et cetera. So one of the things we've been doing over the last 5, 6, 7 years is working with consultants to design stream restoration projects. So the picture on the right you see, now when we get a lot of rain and that river or stream starts flowing, that water can flood out onto the banks. So there's less energy concentrated in the channel, and there's little or no erosion happening. And then not only does that not create more erosion, but it actually allows a lot of the pollutants to settle out in that area so that the water is actually cleansed in that way. Another way is to construct new stormwater facilities. A little bit more expensive to do so. We did a demonstration project at the county office building. You can see the picture on the left, probably like 8 years ago, 10 years ago. But they can be very pretty. This is kind of like part of our landscaping now. You don't even think about it being a stormwater management facility, but it's new stormwater management that did not exist before. Our parking lots used to discharge directly into an underground storm conveyance. And now we have something that removes a lot of the pollutants before that happens. The one on the left or the right here is some wetlands that we constructed just south of downtown Crozet to treat a 50-acre watershed, which had very little, if any at all, stormwater management. So obviously stormwater management will remove a lot of pollutants before the discharges get into the streams. And one more last way that what we do is we'll take existing facilities that are maybe just like big detention basins, not much going on in them, and we'll convert them into, in this case, wetland systems. So the water washes in a wetland cell. There's a lot of plants growing. There's a lot of biological activity. The water can slow down. So there's some physical gravity fallout of pollutants and stuff. So it makes the system work a lot better if you add features to it like wetlands. Okay, next slide. And then lastly, we actually just started a street sweeping program at the county. I don't know if anybody's heard about that. It's really just been going on in the last year. We're working with the City of Charlottesville Public Works Department and basically paying their crews to go out and sweep some of the streets in the county. And that street sweeping picks up a lot of the pollutants that fall out in the street, so that you collect them before they basically get pushed off from the next storm. So that's another way that we're getting a little credit towards these requirements to reduce pollutant discharges in the streams. And by the way, the TMDL has a pretty complex accounting process where we have to essentially document the effects of all these projects on the pounds of sediment, phosphorus, nitrogen that are getting into streams. And we have these long-term targets that we have to meet, or we get into trouble, whatever that looks like. So we're actually doing pretty well, just because we have a supportive board who provides the resources we need to do these projects. Last slide, I think. So I wanted to touch on some other programs that we implement that are sometimes more related, sometimes a little less related to water quality, for instance. But one thing is this Albemarle Conservation Assistance Program. It's actually implemented through the Thomas Jefferson Soil Water Conservation District, but we provide funding to support homeowners or property owners that want to incorporate stormwater management or runoff reduction onto their properties. So we'll actually support financially some of the expenses that they would incur to do that. We also have like a native plant program, which includes an online database, a guidebook, and some demonstration installations, particularly around the county office building. But the picture here, the lower picture, is the Rio 29 intersection, there's some VDOT planners that basically we maintain. So these are, you know, installations like this could add to could add to the reduction of runoff in some cases. But they also have lots of other benefits, which I won't go into right now. The county operates 6 state regulated dams that are not really water quality features, but related to water resources nonetheless. And that takes money. We just spent over $2 million at the Hollymead Dam to make sure that it would sustain the largest theoretical storm that is possible. So it's just another program that takes some of our resources. You've probably heard a lot lately about our climate action planning process, which is kind of like under the sustainability umbrella. And there's a lot of co-benefits to climate actions that would benefit water resources as well. There's a lot of infrastructure out there that is not really being maintained too much on private properties right now. So we're exploring how the county might assist landowners in maintaining that infrastructure. Obviously, if infrastructure fails, you kind of have like a bigger water quality problem than you would if it was maintained properly. And then floodplain development. I don't know if that's more of something that Frank's already discussed, so I won't go into that right now.
Well, I just wanted to say it's another program, the floodplain regulations, limiting any types of development within floodplains.
Okay, thanks for adding that. I was thrown off because I didn't think that was my thing, and I didn't think I added it. But I think that's our last slide, and I guess there's room for answering some questions now, if that's the way we want to go.
Kim, or can we go to questions? And
yes, what I'll do is so that everyone knows what the question is, I'll just read the question and then whoever should answer it can just go ahead and answer. And that way, when folks watch later, they can hear the questions as well. Frank, this one is for you. What kind of complaints were received in 2020? E&S, stormwater management?
Both, all kinds of complaints, flooding problems, sediment getting into streams that are associated with active projects, and some that are not associated with active projects. Could be a forestry activity that we get a call on. Could be mud getting into the street from a construction project. So there's a lot of different types of calls that we get. Not all of them we can address. We always talk to the folks that are causing the complaint to try to solve or resolve it. Sometimes there's enforcement, sometimes there's not. Most of the time there is enforcement, but sometimes there isn't. And enforcement, but I mean cooperation to resolve the situation. I hope that answered your question, Kirk.
Great, thanks, Frank. And then from Elizabeth, we have, why are agricultural activities exempt when clearing of land can cause soil erosion?
That is the Right to Farm Act, and we can't overrule state law with regards to that. So I don't have a better answer other than we are not authorized to regulate agricultural activities, no matter how much pollution or runoff they contribute to the streams. The ag, it's basically exempt. Kim, can you leave these up also and I'll click the answer live when I'm done so I can just read them again.
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
That was it.
There's another question from the same person on the same topic. It says, can you please clarify if agricultural activities are required to have stream buffers?
This is a similar answer, that agricultural activities are exempt from our ordinance and therefore they are not required to have buffers. So the answer is no to that question.
Okay. Another one from Kirk says, can you please explain what erosion impact areas are and where they are located? Thank you.
Sure. So I'm going to read the definition because it's pretty clear. It's an area of land not associated with current land disturbing activity, but subject to persistent soil erosion resulting in the delivery of sediment onto neighboring properties or into state waters, provided the area of land is not a lot or parcel of 10,000 square feet or less, used for residential purposes, or a shoreline, which doesn't really apply here, where the soil erosion erosion results from wave action. So it's persistent soil erosion and delivery of sediments onto neighboring properties or into state waters. We haven't had a lot of, there are areas that look to be eroding. A lot of our streams are eroding. We don't go out and claim those as erosion impact areas because that's something that we would be too much of a burden for any single homeowner to address or landowner, considering it is kind of a natural phenomenon here in this county. But we've had a few that we've had to address since I've been here 3 or 4 years ago.
Thanks, Frank.
And where are they located? Usually in the rural areas, to answer your question on that.
Okay. Thanks, Frank. I will keep going, but I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A on the toolbar at the bottom. So another question from Jean: are there future county plans for any type of stream buffer, on intermittent streams?
So there are buffers when you're in the rural areas. This, I'm assuming, is referring to development areas, because that's where we do not have buffers on intermittent streams. And currently there's no plans for that. There has been discussion about it. There's also the discussion about limited development areas and reducing the land available for development. But no, there hasn't been any discussion about providing buffers. We do encourage folks not to, and highly recommend folks not to pipe streams. We know that that's, if we can avoid it, we ask folks to do that. Most of the time people do not want to pipe a stream, but since I've been here, I don't recall a stream being piped, except for like a crossing for roads and whatnot. There have been impacts and buffers, though, of course, on intermittent streams. And a lot of our streams are surrounded by critical slopes, which offers another level of protection for some of our streams. I won't say all of them, but some streams. I hope that answers your question, Jean.
Thanks, Frank. So next question: what county agency manages septic systems in the county and their impact on water quality?
Jim, that's the Department of Health, the Health Department rather, VDH, and they regulate those septic systems. If one fails, then they help, they work with the owner to find a place. There should be a reserve on their property. If there isn't, one I dealt with this past week was they needed to, they're going to pipe and connect to a sewer line that RWSA owns. So the health department really keeps the track on that. We don't have anybody that really goes out and inspects for the septic systems.
Thanks, Frank. So another question from Elizabeth: who would I contact about starting a stream restoration project for Licking Hole Creek on my property?
I could take that. This is Greg. I would contact me, Elizabeth. So you could probably find me on the web, but it's gharper@albemarle.org, and I'd be happy to talk with you about that. I've seen some pretty bad erosion on Licking Hole Creek in areas, so I have to agree that it's probably a problem. I'm not surprised. There are problem streams everywhere throughout the county, so we actually have a process where we try to identify and prioritize where the worst case erosion is happening and where we might get the biggest bang for the buck to do a restoration project. We typically haven't worked outside the urban areas just because from an accounting point of view, we don't get a lot of credit for doing stream restoration activities outside the urban area, which seems backwards, but we have this MS4 permit. It's really an urban focused permit that requires us to do capital projects. And so we want to use our money as wisely as we can. So we end up doing almost all of the work in the urban areas. But nonetheless, I have other suggestions on some departments, and not departments at the county, but state departments that might be able to help you with that.
Thanks, Greg. So another one for you, it's what expenses are eligible under the ACAP program? And I believe Laurel also just posted a link to the chat, in the chat to that program as well.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say Laurel is pretty connected with that program more so than I am, but I know that material costs are covered, and I do believe that design and installation costs can be covered as well. Laurel, do you want to step in to correct me if I've said anything wrong?
You're exactly right. There is a cap on how much money can go to the practice. So that's often maxed out, and that is also very variable depending on the type of practice you're implementing. But that website I just put a link to has a lot of details, and I'm sure the Soil and Water District would be happy to hear your questions as well for the details. They know a lot more about it than I do in terms of all those specific finance details.
Thanks, Laurel. So another question from Nancy here. Assuming trash such as bottles, cups, fast food containers is considered pollution, what can be done to stop trash runoff from 29, Rio, Hillsdale, etc., into the stormwater retention facilities along Hillsdale and at Greenbrier?
I can take this question. Hi, Nancy. Great question. Trash is a pollutant. There are actually communities out there that have a requirement to reduce the amount of trash discharging into streams. We don't, although we all know that trash is a problem along our roads and in our streams as well. We've struggled with this one because it's really hard to trap trash. And typically, and unfortunately, the best way to trap trash is actually in the facilities. But if your facility is visible and it's kind of like you make it into a little park-like thing with picnic benches and stuff like that, then you've got trash floating around your detention pond and it's kind of ugly. So we've worked with a company that creates these like little like nets that you install at the outfall of a pipe. And we tried that along 29 in an area, and the first storm we got, the thing filled with trash, and then it completely ripped the netting off because there was so much energy. And so we've done research to see what other communities are doing, and it's just really difficult, really expensive. I'd love to say that if we just tell people not to litter, that's the solution, but we know that doesn't work. So constant struggle. We recognize that it's a problem. One more thing we've done actually in that area that you mentioned, Hillsdale, Greenbrier area, we do have a detention, like a kind of a pre-detention basin just north of the pond that is at Greenbrier and Hillsdale. And it's sort of a little less seen, kind of like just north of that car area. Just next to Food Line, I guess. And we actually put a floating screen in that little basin to trap a lot of trash. So we've been successful in that area of actually trapping trash. And then it's a lot of work that our maintenance guys have to go out there and clean off like every few weeks. And it's quite an ordeal, but it's worth it to get the trash out of the streams. It's just something that we're just going to continue to work at.
Thanks, Greg. I've got a question from Donna. She says, can volunteer citizens be trained to assist the inspection process? Could they take pictures of erosion during and after rains?
I can answer this one. We can take complaints. We can't advocate pitting citizen against citizen, because I think that would be could potentially be seen that way, Donna, but we have no objections to receiving complaints, and we will act on complaints. So if this is something you want to take upon yourself or anybody else, we'd be happy to take them and address them how we can. But I wouldn't advocate this necessarily. It's my personal opinion. I don't know how the board would feel or others feel about it, but sometimes when we get complaints, we do see that it does develop into, it can become an adversarial position depending what the complaint is. So we do allow complaints, for instance, to complain without giving their name anonymously. And but if you have complaints, you can definitely send them in and we will work on addressing them.
Okay, last question I have here. If you have any others, put them in the Q&A now. We're right at an hour. This last one is from Jean. Is there any discussion regarding Licking Hole Basin filling in with sediment? BMPs along main stem stream seem antiquated, warm up water, algal blooms, etc. Is that basin permanent?
I can take a stab at that. And I know a lot of people were involved with last week's discussion from the folks at the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority who actually operate the Licking Hole Basin. And they, I think, mentioned that the Licking Hole Basin was actually built to keep the sediment from reaching the South Fork Reservoir, which is the main water supply reservoir. So I think it was built with the idea that it would fill up with sediment over time. All basins do. Yeah, you can't build basins like that in streams anymore, perhaps unless it's for like a water supply purpose. But I think there's recognition that the sediment filling in the basin is a problem. It's really, really hard to remove sediment that has filled a large reservoir like that. But I know that the basin's permanent too. If you've been out there, you've probably seen that huge concrete dam that actually creates that basin. I have not heard discussion about removing it. I think that would be super expensive. But long term, yeah, we're gonna have to deal with like how to keep our basins like this healthy and sustainable over a long, long time. Without spending, what seems to be like a fortune to remove that sediment. And the logistical challenges are just still crazy when it comes to stuff like that. So not a great answer, but I do recognize that, yeah, I agree with you that it's kind of like something that we're going to have to deal with eventually.
Thank you, Greg. And we're getting a lot of thank yous coming in the Q&A here. Thank you both for your presentation today. That was really great. And we got a lot of good questions. So thank you everybody out there asking those questions. I hope you'll join us next week. We're going to hear from Ravenna Conservation Alliance and also DEQ about some of the water quality monitoring efforts and the current conditions of our waterways in the county. So thank you everyone for coming. And again, these recordings will be on our public input site.
Thank you all.